annual vegetables and how we can overwinter them and maybe bringing them in or leaving them in the garden and using protection to keep them like a refrigerator out there, but not frozen.
Okay, so one plant that you can actually overwinter indoors and is a good idea if maybe you grow some specific pepper plants. So if you are like, this is my, I don't know, ghost pepper or habanero or whatever, you can overwinter. Now, overwintering them does not mean that it's going to be successful. You and I tried it once with one pepper. We were not successful.
We didn't do it with hot peppers. Hot peppers it is found to be, hot peppers seem to be a little more tolerable over the overwintering process than a mild pepper for whatever reason.
But I think if you have the space, you should just give it a try.
And when we're talking about overwintering, we're talking about, you can do two different things here. We can bring them in, put them next to a nice sunny window, and keep them green foliage alive or under a happy leaf LED grow light, something like that. Or we can go to the realm of putting them in a closet and basically making them go dormant to essentially.
It's not a closet.
Reducing light.
Right, reducing light. So there's a process here. So first you want to make sure you spray the plant off.
Last thing you want is additional animals and insects that are going to live with you until you move.
So you want to dig it up, and then you want to put it in a 5-gallon bucket with some similar soil.
Now, what if we've already got it in a container on the porch, patio, or deck? Can we just bring it in? We still need to rinse it off.
You want to rinse it off, and then probably if you can leave it in like a hallway or something, a breezeway, for a couple days, just in case.
Okay.
Whatever. Yeah. So you spray the plant off, make sure it's kind of adjusted to the inside world, put a 5-gallon bucket of soil in there, and then you're going to place in a cool, semi-dark place, like a basement or an attached garage, something like that. And what's going to happen is that the leaves will die back and fall off, and that's what you want. And you only want to water it every 3 to 4 weeks during this process. And once the leaves start to fall back or die off, you want to prune the plant. So you just basically trim it back so there's just a bunch of Y-shaped branches about 2 to 3 inches in length of those Y-shaped branches. Then about a month before your last frost date, you're going to bring your pepper plant out of the cool location and move it to a brighter, warmer location.
All right.
And you could even do like near the Happy Leaf grow light. And then you do that for about a month. You could use a heating pad, and then you want to resume watering at the normal rate, but just kind of increase it during that month.
So whenever it's in its semi-dark area, you were not watering it, or are we watering, or what's the status there on the...
Every 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay. So you kind of want to keep moisture to it, but you don't want it to dry out, but you also don't want too much moisture, otherwise it's going to try to start growing again, and that's not what you want.
Right, exactly. So I think it's worth a try, especially if you are growing these specialty hot peppers, and it's not a bad idea.
No, and it's a lot more. We kind of gave you the gist of enough information to get you going. There is some good articles out there on how you can do this much more in depth than what we're able to cover in just a short period of time. What we want, broccoli can be planted early in the spring, as well as in the fall. And you can overwinter that to a certain degree. Right.
So it can handle temperatures about down to 26 to 31 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're not necessarily overwintering it, but if you live in an area where maybe it doesn't get that cool, that's something that you could possibly grow and maintain throughout winter.
All right. Brussels sprouts is another?
Yeah, so those are another one.
And cabbage are all kind of in the same family. They're all brassicas, so they can all kind of be similar in conditional requirements to get more longevity out of them.
Right, and Brussels sprouts, so once you leave them out in the cool weather, they can go down to as low as 26 degrees. And once you leave them out in the cool weather, they actually become a little bit tastier. Their sugars increase, and it gives those Brussels sprouts I don't want to say better taste, but sweeter. Yeah. And kale's the hardy one here. It can go down to, temperatures of about 10 degrees. But not all kale. Certain varieties of kale can handle
much colder temperatures.
Yeah. So typically like a dinosaur kale, Lasiento kale, and then ornamental kale, all of those will survive to about 10 degrees. And I remember we saw this. We had that one, it was probably like 10 years ago now. We had that really warm winter, and our neighbor had some ornamental kale.
Which is edible.
And it did last a long time.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, with any of those kales, cabbages, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, they do go to seed the second year if you allow them to be left alone. And even on a mild winter, you want to harvest as much as possible. And it's not so much you're growing it during the cold portions, it's you're sustaining the life of it. So it's basically as best as it can be. You're keeping it chilled outside in the natural refrigerator of nature. And then when you're ready to harvest, then you can harvest it, bring it in. You're not trying to harvest it, keep it in the fridge for 3, 8 weeks or whatever the case is. And then we all know how that ends up. In some instances, you try to guess what that once was in the refrigerator. Now let's talk about root crops. Carrots, for example, here. We can overwinter those in the garden by covering them. And this would be the same for parsnips or turnips or rutabagas as well.
Right. So if you're going to do this, whatever carrots that you might want to use for food preservation, you want to harvest those. But because you want to harvest those, that their freshness, so whether it be like you're making canning a soup,
pressure canning
a soup, pressure canning just carrots, whatever, you want to harvest those directly. You don't want to can the carrots that have been sitting in the soil.
So the ones that have been sitting in the soil, those are your grocery store carrots, meaning that you can go out and harvest when you want. And I believe that this was a technique that is used by the Amish. They'll take a patch, let's say it's the size of your queen size bed. There's carrots there. They will mound 6, 8 feet of leaves on top of that. It'll keep the carrots in the soil frigid, but it will not allow it to freeze. And then as they're wanting to harvest, then they can go ahead and remove those leaves. The soil is frigid, but still diggable or workable in order to remove the carrots. This is also a very great way to utilize if you've got a Jerusalem artichoke patch where they have a very short shelf life, or sunchokes is what some people will label them as. You can trim back the top portion of them, so it kind of, knock that down. And then you can mound leaves on top of that bed, and that way you can harvest them through the winter months. In the northern portions here of the United States where we're located, and many of you are, when it gets cold, it doesn't mess around. It gets cold, and it stays that way for months on end. So we want to be as prepared as possible. Because, you can bring carrots in, pack them in sawdust or sand and preserve them that way in the basement or a root cellar or in a chilled area of the house. But if you can leave them actually in the physical ground, that's the best way to preserve them, is by leaving them where they naturally grow.
Right. Yep. So that is definitely an option.
And let's say we don't have leaves available to mound over these items. What are some other alternatives in which we can use?
You can use straw. So you can just go to your local garden center or
find the fall festival parties on November 1st. And a lot of those straw bales are kicked to the side of the road after the fall decorations have been removed. And then they move into the next holiday, which would be Thanksgiving. So that's a great way to find straw bales for a straw bale garden. You still have to condition those in the spring, but you can place them in the position in which they're going to be next spring. And you can also utilize those as mulch to preserve and protect the plants in which you're trying to leave outside and keep them safe and warm.
Right. So you can use those straw bales, and that is useful. Straw bale, like straw or leaves, is probably your best bet for covering up carrots. I don't really know what else you would use.
That would be about all, yeah. I wouldn't use like wood chips or anything like that because those will freeze it, but you want something loose, fluffy, light, won't blow away, but yet still will hold that insulation. It's like an insulation that you're protecting the soil with in that. Anything else that we're missing here in the short amount of time that we're able to talk about the overwintering of plants?
No, but you can also, if you have perennial plants, whether that be some sort of flower or shrub or what have you, at this point you would have to think about maintenance or care for that, and that would be like whatever that looks like: harvesting bulbs, moving bulbs, planting bulbs, things like that. People tend to do that in the fall.
Right, and if you're concerned about, if you've got, a tinder plant, typically you would have that in a container and you would move it into a garage or a protected area. And that's why we always recommend, if you're going to buy, fancy plants, I guess that's what you would call these, tropical plants, you would want to have some place where you can physically bring them in so you're not repurchasing them the next growing season. And then if you do decide to grow a plant, a bush, a shrub, a flower, whatever that case is, in your backyard, you want to look at the growing zone that those things are listed for. That's why that label is there. If it can withstand growing temperature or growing zone 3 to 8, and you're in zone 4, then you're probably okay. But if you're in zone 4 and it's rated for 4, about every 5 years, you're probably going to have to repurchase that plant, because there's going to be a cold snap that comes through that's going to ruin that plant. You always want to have the growing zone being one colder than where you're at to have a better success on whatever that particular item is that you're putting in your property for beauty or for production.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.